Thank you. Well, last night, the candidates for vice president faced off on the debate stage. Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Walz, mostly focusing on the issues, but also defending past comments. Topics range from the fighting in the Middle East to immigration, abortion access, and the economy.
Joining us this morning is Joshua Blank. He is the research director for the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin. Josh, as always, thank you for being here for this.
Thanks for having me.
You know, as the moderators noted several times, we have a lot to discuss. So I want to start with a moment that really stood out to a lot of us when we were looking at the totality of the comments last night, and that was when J.D. Vance did not answer the question about who won the 2020 election. He still refused to acknowledge the real results. I'm wondering, how much weight do you think that might carry with voters here in Texas when you're looking at the scope of all the other topics addressed last night?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a moment that people have really kind of honed in on and focused on. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge first and foremost that as much as there was a national audience, for Vance and really for anyone else in the Republican Party, there is an important audience of one, which is the former president. And President Trump has made clear his belief that he did not lose the election. He's doubled down on this in the last debate. So I don't really think that Senator Vance really had much of an option other than to follow the line of his principle here. Having said that, when we look at polling data in Texas, we do still find a majority of Republican voters who don't believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election legitimately. And so while it is the case that most voters still see the still see the 2020 election as a legitimate exercise in democracy, there is a large share of Republican voters for whom this is still to be litigated, this is not over. And so for Vance to reflect that is not really entirely surprising.
Yeah, Joshua, also, in a lot of his answers last night, we heard J.D. Vance really linking immigration to a number of problems that the country is facing right now, including housing. Do you think that was really a strategy that appealed more to the Republican base or those undecided voters who are really just trying to make up their minds still?
Yeah, look, immigration and border security consistently rank as the most important issue for Republican voters. And I think it is a good question to ask, is this something that sort of reaches beyond that base? And I think the question is maybe a little bit, or maybe that's the answer, right? But the reality is these elections that we're having in America right now are so close and they're so competitive, and they really are about turnout. It's not so much about persuasion and trying to see whether or not you can chip off, if you're a Republican, some Democrats, or if you're a Democrat, chip off some Republican voters. It really is about, can you turn out your base? Are you speaking to your partisans? Are they fired up and ready to come vote for you? And that's what you're seeing with this constant drumbeat on immigration, regardless of what the question is.
In addition to all the things that were discussed last night, a big section of the discussion at the debate was about abortion access and abortion restrictions across the country. Governor Walz really focused on the situation here in Texas. So I'm wondering about the numbers that you all see in your research. How do Texans feel about some of the more restrictive elements to abortion access here in Texas?
Oh, it's very straightforward. Ultimately, the state's laws are basically at odds with public opinion in the state. When we ask Texas voters numerous different ways across time and across space with different types of questions, what we generally find is that most people believe that women should be able to access abortion for some period of time, legal abortion, for some period of time given a range of potential circumstances. And this is basically true before the end of Roe v. Wade. It's been true after the end of Roe v. Wade, and even as the state has gone and actually ratcheted down access, people still generally tend to believe that women should be able to access a safe legal abortion, at least at some point during the pregnancy.
How though, do you think that might affect the support that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump will pull in, given that those numbers exist?
I think that's the big question of this election. I mean, ultimately, if this is an election where people are looking at how they feel about pocketbook issues, how they feel about the border, it's going to be a hard year for Democrats. At the same time, Democrats, I think, are doing all they can to raise this issue of women's access to health care, with abortion being sort of the main issue that's really driving this, and seeing whether that does drive up turnout among women, and especially among younger women in places like Texas.
One more quick question because we have to go, but I have to ask. It seemed like it was a pretty cordial debate, which we have not seen much of in recent times. Do you think that you guys now are going to do more polling to just kind of see whether or not this did affect voters?
I think the thing that's been so remarkable about this election has been the rigidity of where voters are. If you think about everything that's happened this summer, including the presidential debate that was much more fiery and had a much clearer and obvious winner, almost none of that has really affected the polling. The likelihood of this impacting the polling, I think, is very, very small at this point.
Very good context. Josh Blank with the Texas Politics Project. As always, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we will be right back after this, so stay with us.